Rob Miller, welcome to the Pre-Construction Podcast.
Wait, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Love it. The one thing that drew me to Roy Miller was his LinkedIn tagline. It read, culture fanboy, positive change embracer, and comedy enthusiast. I love it. I'm sick. I'm sick reading the same titles all the time. We're going to get into detail on those three. But before we do,
Perfect.
Director of Pre-Construction at Big D out of Tempe, Arizona.
That's right.
Is this your first podcast?
Um, yeah, that's not like with my buddies messing around that never gets published. Yes.
So we're going to bring some comedy to this podcast. We're going to bring some humor. We're going to take we're going to take it to a next level. We're going to have some crack, as they say in Ireland. But where I want to start, Rod, is back at Arizona State. You did a construction management degree, but it says on your LinkedIn construction and estimating. Give us an idea, because one of the pain points for me is within the education system, pre-construction and estimating is not taught enough, especially within a construction management degree. Was that any different at Arizona State?
So I went a number of years ago, so I can't speak to what it is today, but back when I went, when I had, well, you can't really see, this camera's doing a great job of covering up all my grays. I like it. So yeah, so I remember sitting in a class and they asked, okay, who here wants to be a project manager? And pretty much everybody's like hands raised up high. They're very proud about what they want to do after school, and it's like, okay. And I kind of looked around, and back then I knew that I didn't want it. That's not what I wanted to do, right? Ultimately, I wanted to be in pre-construction, and then they said, all right, well, who wants to be a superintendent? And it was like, I don't know, maybe two, three guys, they're kind of looking, dressed in their flannel all the time, looking like a very stereotypical superintendent, right? And then they ask, and who wants to be in pre-construction? Or, they might have said estimating. I can't remember. But like, it was like me and like one other weirdo that kind of raised their hands, and we're looking at each other and we're just like pointed to each other like, hey, we should be friends. It's so, very low percentage of people, I think, understand what it is and what we do. And in the program, I think at the time they only had one, you could take optional classes, but one class was required for estimating, right? And it was very unstructured. Like they were just like, hey, here's a set of plans, go quantify them. There was no training, right, with any tools that were available at the time. And so some of us just kind of had to just see what was on the computers at the computer lab at school. And they had on this new tool called on-screen takeoff, right? And it was like, hey, let's load it in here. And we basically like we taught ourselves. I mean, that was the crazy thing. Like we taught ourselves how to use this tool. And so it was kind of like there wasn't a lot of, like you said, I think you were spot on when you said there just isn't a lot of education with that. And so it's I think there's a strong parallel with that with regards to like the trades, right? There's not enough labor and blah, blah, blah. Well, we're running into the same thing in pre-construction. I think there's not a lot of people that are passionate about like, man, I want to be an estimator. I want to be a pre-construction professional. It's kind of like I went recruiting up at Northern Arizona University, which is in Flagstaff, Arizona. So kind of a mountainous, it's not deserty, it's all mountainous. They have trees and it rains and it snows, right? And we don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like I went to this recruiting event and students were kind of walking by and they would talk to my peers who were with me, and they were more on the project management side, and they turned to me and like, well, what do you do? I'm like, well, I work in pre-construction. And they're like, and they keep walking, right? And then I had to be like aggressive and just be like, hey, and they all had name tags. So I just picked one out of the crowd. Hey, Tom, come over here. I want to talk to you about pre-construction. And once I started describing what it is we do, because in their mind, it's like, oh, you guys are, introverts, you're weirdos. They stick you guys in a room in very low light conditions. You'll get a set of plans underneath the door, and in 2 weeks you'll come up with a price, but we'll feed you every so often, right? Maybe put some food under there, maybe some water, right? And that's what you guys do, and you don't communicate with anybody else. And I think that's, that was the case maybe, 20, 30 years ago, where that was the stereotypes come from somewhere, right? And so it's evolved and it's changed over time. Technology's had a huge part in how we do things. Contract types have definitely changed the way we approach our relationships with clients, with design teams, with each other. Right now, we're communicating with our ops team, we're communicating with our superintendents, and they're, and when we first started doing that, I remember they're like, whoa, like, why are you talking to me? Like, you guys usually are in a room doing it wrong. Right. And we don't know everything. So we're very dependent on those that we get input from in order to make sure we put together a solid plan. So
yeah, no, listen, I couldn't agree with you. But the evolution is so fast now that people are struggling to keep up, whether it be on technology side, whether it be on the people side. That's pretty standard, to be honest with you, Rod. And the education system's not set up. It's almost ticking a box when you're talking about pre-construction, a small module, maybe a quarter of a semester. So it's an evolving, whether it be technology, whether it be on the skill set side. But something you mentioned kind of resonated with me. How we communicate with our design partners is a big thing, and it's changing all the time. I know it's something that you're passionate about, and you've spoken at Advancing Pre-Construction in the past about it. Let's take that topic. How has it evolved through your career? And I just want to set the scene here and give people an idea. With Big D at the minute, over 7 years with Ryan Companies, over 3 years with Core Construction, and 3 years with Holder. So great pedigree. How has it evolved from when you came into the industry to today? How do we deal with our design partners?
Yeah, great question. So what I've found is part of the way you see things kind of evolve is it's definitely different per geography, right? Not just geography, but also I would say product type as well. And so I did some work in for example, Louisiana, where a lot of that work was hard bid. And so like there was not a lot of positive, I would say, interaction with the design team, right? When I was with Holder, they did a lot of work throughout the United States, and they used to be, I think they still are, the largest data center builder in the country. And so, what I found is like the amount of time you spent in pre-con for a data center was about the same time that you spent building the thing. At least that's the way it used to be. I'm sure it's probably changed since then for them. But the idea is that you're providing input to the design team in order to make it more cost effective or better design, just because of the experience that we had at Holder in doing data centers. When I moved to Ryan Companies, it was a totally different approach. They do mostly design build, and it's not design build at every GC says they do design build. Ryan Companies has a kind of a different flavor on it. And so I think everybody has their own different flavor on it, right? And it's not like, hey, let's get the architect under our wing and let them go design in a silo. And then when they come out with, schematic design documents, we'll price them and tell them how they did their job wrong. It's more, hey, let's, instead of having rework and having to go through VE at every section, it's, hey, let's estimate it, right? On a conceptual estimate, because we know what things cost, right? From a systems-based standpoint, I know how much the substructure should cost. If it's, call it shallow foundations, I know what the skin should be. If it's this type of product type, I know what the interior construction should cost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's based on, hey, rinse, repeat kind of thing, because we've done this product type so many times. And so you take that information, you come up with an estimate, and then you communicate with the design team saying, hey, here's what we want to build. Here's the parameters. Stay within the parameters. And it sounds very like rah, 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 but it was actually a very collaborative approach. And I'll give you one example. So like on the skin of any project, right? Like if it's a multifamily project, you're going to have a kind of a range dollars per square foot of your entire skin. Same thing as if it's a data center or if it's an industrial warehouse building, you kind of know what those metrics are after you've done a few. And so when we kind of come up with the conceptual budgets to help the design team stay within a budget, it's like, all right, here's, we could get as detailed as we wanted to say, hey, here's our total square footage. We've got this percentage of this material, that percentage of that material. Here's the unit costs. Here's the total cost. Here's the total cost that you have to work with. And, and when you give that spreadsheet to a designer, they're like, spreadsheet. I only deal with pictures, right? And so they're like, I don't know what this means. And so you sit down and you kind of we would kind of work with them to say, okay, this dollar figure here, this is the total dollars that you have to work with. You can play around with these ratios for all these different material types to come up with something that you deem looks great. Because I kind of don't care what it looks like. I just want to go build it, right? And so, yeah, and I do care about design. I'm being facetious there because if you look at my background, I spent 2 years going to architecture school at ASU as well. But I try not to advertise that too much. So maybe you can edit that part out.
Why not?
But
Before you go on, why not? Because surely that makes you a better pre-construction.
it does. And again, I'm being facetious, but this collaborative approach with the design team, what it would do is it would then kind of allow for a lot of rework to not happen, right? And then at the end, when you get your CDs, doing it design build that way, it was like, okay, we're involved in the design meetings. We're talking to the consultants, not just the architect, but I'm talking to the civil engineer. I'm talking to the mechanical engineer. I'm talking to the electrical. So, right, we're kind of bringing everybody together. Here's the vision. Here's the approach. And here's what we assumed. And it didn't always work perfectly, right? And it was like, hey, we can't do this approach because, this and this and this other reason, right? And it's like, okay, well, let's change the approach. But at least you could get 80% of your estimate pretty darn accurate at the conceptual phase instead of waiting till you get to CDs to know, hey, what's the budget for this thing? And so at Ryan Companies, they were also their own developers. So we were working closely with them. We had this certain level of trust where they would say, hey, here's how much my pro forma can actually withstand instead of the typical approach of, hey, how low can you go, Mr. GC, right? And that's the other part of that puzzle is, yes, it's getting the design team to be collaborative, but also the owner, right? And truly building that trust with that owner to know, like, hey, what truly is your budget? Because if it's unreasonable, then, we don't want to waste our time, your time, and maybe there's a different solution that we all can come to together.
Yeah. And that collaboration part as well, what you just said makes perfect sense. Now, you said it before as well. Design build is not always run like that. It's run maybe by the owner or by the designer. But the GC, right, so the GC wants to get in early. That's basically standardized across the market for general contractors. The designers obviously would want help and would want less reworks and change orders. And the owner wants less change orders as well. So is that the way that you have always done it? You continue to do it? Is that the future, or is that just within specific? And you mentioned as well, when you're doing the same, and you've got the historical data, it becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think that's a complicated question because it truly depends on your owner and your design team, right? Not every architect can do design build.
Yeah,
I will be very passionate in saying that. What I mean by that is there are architects out there that are kind of high design architects that want to kind of showcase their, what they can do, which is great if the owner can afford it. If the owner has a lot of money, which there's always a finite amount of money, but I think that, you have to have the right team to start out with in order to take that approach, right? The owner has to have a lot of trust in his team in order to take that approach. If you have kind of this, old curmudgeon owner that's used to doing hard bid and, used to doing things a certain way, it's not going to work out well. Or if you have an architect that thinks that all GCs are scum of the earth trying to make their buildings uglier, right? It's like, it's not going to work. And so I've had situations where we've had to build that trust, right? And we've been able to kind of do not design build because the contracts weren't structured that way, but more of a design assist to kind of say to the architect, sit down with them, oftentimes without the owner, right? And say, hey, what are your goals, right? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And then here's what we're trying to accomplish. And there's a lot of times, a lot of commonality in terms of what we're after. And so, asking the architect, well, what's important to you? Oh, well, it's this glass in this certain area. And then if we know that, we're not going to, necessarily suggest VE ideas to get rid of his most prized, part of the skin, right? And so we got to a point with one architect that I was dealing with once. They were a little bit difficult to deal with at first. They kind of threw us under the bus a few times with the client in the room. And so we kind of took, offline meeting, and we were able to develop this relationship of trust with them to the point where they were now recommending us for other projects to other owners. And so I think that's important as well, right? Is as you kind of make a name for yourself, people will be like, oh, yeah, they do things a certain way, and this is the way they do it, and it's collaborative. It's great. We want to work with them, right? We want to be associated with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the designers, obviously, and then that works its way down then to the trade partners and the subcontractors, which is so important. And is there any lessons that you've learned with specifically with the design teams, how to kind of manage that and kind of work around issues, but also early on decide whether it's a design team or an architecture firm that you want to work for? What are the go no go strategies?
Yeah. So, I think it's important for them to be an expert in their given product type. I've had a few missteps where we hired, an architect that had never done, for example, multifamily before, right? And then they get their buddies that have never, their consultant buddies, right? You got a mechanical engineer that's never done multifamily, and a structural engineer that's never done multifamily, and right, and because the multifamily craze was like, hey, there's all this demand, we gotta pivot, right? We're no longer doing offices, let's do multifamily now. This is what some of the architecture firms would do, and so and that led to a lot of just bad relationships, I would say, right? Because then they have this preconceived notion of, hey, we know how to do our job. And then when the GC comes in, hey, this is typically how it's done. And, and for this, and this reason, well, you're not telling us what to do, out the gate. And so, it's important to understand who your partners are, what their strengths are. So if you're, trying to build a multifamily project and you're doing design build, my biggest recommendation is just make sure you get somebody it's not their first rodeo, right?
Yeah.
Make sure they know what they're doing, because you don't want to waste time. You don't want to be part of the learning curve. You don't want to pay for the learning curve. Your owners don't want to pay for that learning curve, right? So understanding what their strengths are, and certainly the product type is a big strength. The other one I would say is understand who their consultants are as well. Just, for the same reasons, and understand, get into the weeds a little bit. It's easy to just sign up an architect and design build and say, well, they've got it. And it's like, no, because it's you're part of the process as well as the general contractor. And then again, the owner, back to the owner, that's important as well. Because if you don't have an owner that trusts you, and you can build trust with anybody, but there's only a certain amount of time that you have to do that before you have to start construction and finish construction. And sometimes it's you have owners that just aren't worth working for. They're just not. And so you're wanting to avoid that, right? I mean, yeah, you get into situations where, hey, I've got to make my revenue goals for the year, and I've got to work with somebody I wouldn't typically work with. But if you can at all avoid it, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And it's been able to say no as well. The more times you say no, the more times it'll generally work out for you. You mentioned something there as well. You mentioned about the cost, and one of the big topics at the minute that I'm talking about in the podcast is FreeCon, is pre-construction services through the owner. And this kind of ties in with relationships, being humble from the designer, the architect, and the owner. How do you go about it? And within your career, has FreeCon are we getting a little bit of standardization when it comes to pre-construction services, the cost of that, how much of the cost is absorbed in the project? Or what's your view on it?
Yeah, I've seen it done a few ways in my career, and it's largely market driven. So when the market is slow, you have all FreeCon, right? Like, because there, you can get it for free from anybody because everybody wants the job, and if you're like, hey, job's yours if you can kind of help me out, and then they end up bidding it out sometimes anyways. But there's not a lot you can do when markets are slow. Now when markets are hot, heating up, then you're more likely to be able to get money. And so again, it comes a good communication with your owners to be able to help present what is that value add, right? Because if they don't see the value to it, they're just gonna they might pay it, but they're going to just do it with kind of like this, have this bad taste in their mouth the whole time, even through construction. And so helping them understand, like, hey, here's kind of our our service levels. Here's what we're planning on doing. Here's what it requires from us. Here's what it requires from you, right? And so helping them understand that value and then putting a little business proposal together for them, because I think and then it becomes a discussion at that point. And that's really what you want to do is, you want to help your client feel that they're getting something out of it and not just, hey, I'm getting something out of it.
I want to talk as well about culture, because culture fanboy, obviously it's really important. I think having an actual pre-construction culture within a company, you can have an overall culture ethos, but a pre-construction culture, I think, is a topic right now. So I'll just go into a topic with that. If you could talk to that, and
yeah, for sure.
And then once we're at, so I'll start it now. Brilliant, Rod. Well, listen, another thing that I want to talk about again comes back to the title, culture fanboy. I mean, we talk a lot about culture within construction, but for me, I think for this podcast, for pre-construction, I think it's something that we need to kind of sort out ourselves. So having a pre-construction culture. What's your view on that now as director of pre-construction at Big D?
Yeah, so I think as let me think here for a second, because I think as pre-con professionals, we always try to quantify everything, right? We're like, okay, I know that this costs this. I know that this unit cost is for this, economies of scale, blah, 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 right? And we get hung up on like just being, very analytical on everything that we do. And then when it comes to culture, it's like, how do you quantify that, right? Well, how do I know if I got it? How do I know if I got a strong culture or a good culture or a bad culture or a toxic culture, right? And that's where it becomes really difficult for companies. And so I think when you have good culture, you know it,
Yeah.
right? And I think if you have a bad culture, you know it. But how do you kind of how do you make sense of all that? And I think that's especially people that are, bean counters in accounting and even the C-suite, they look at it as, yeah, we think it's important. And sometimes there's folks that don't put a lot of value in it. And so one of the reasons that I went to Ryan Companies as I heard about the great culture that they had, right? That was their big pitch. And so when I went over there, I was kind of like, all right, I've got a couple of friends that work here. They've confirmed it. So I kind of I was a good friend and just let them figure it out and tell me if it was right or not. And so, yeah, right. It's kind of like that friend that pushes the bear down or pushes the friend down when they're getting chased by the bear.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Right. So yeah. So, I mean, they confirmed it. So when I got there, it was great. Right. And they did a great job of really making you feel like you're being heard, had great activities for folks and, just a lot of different things that they would do. And so I would say that they did a great job. And so one of the things at Big D that I would say is what drew me here is a lot of similar things, right? They're always doing stuff for the employees. They're looking out for each other here in the office. And so I think it's hard to quantify, but I mean, what we've done is basically said, okay, what are people interested in this specific office, right? And people were like, oh, well, we really want to help the community out. Oh, well, we really want to have fun. And oh, we want, whatever the interest groups were, and kind of helped put together activities to just say, okay, let's address what people actually want to do and create opportunities for people to really just kind of collaborate and talk to outside of work, right? Because work is one thing, I think. And if you can get people to connect on a different level other than work, because right, we're with each other for 8+ hours every day. And if you don't get along, or if you get that one person that's a jerk, I censored myself, that's a jerk, that can drive away a lot of people, right? And I've experienced that where it's like, oh man, this person's really talented. We're gonna keep them on the team because man, they can produce such a great work product, and they're just awesome at what they do. So we're gonna keep them, but they're a jerk, right? And it's like, right? And so people see that and they're like, that guy's a jerk. I don't want to work here. And so the talent leaves. Right. And so it's like, and then when the talent leaves, the business unit heads are scratching their heads like, well, what happened? We had this high performer and everybody was working well. And then everybody just left. And it's like, well, let's talk about culture, right? Let's look at what, what things, and it runs, I would say, fairly deep within Big D. What I really rely heavily on is our recruiters to sift out the jerks from the not jerks. That's like step one. Like, I don't want any jerks in my group or in our office, and let's sift those guys out, right? They might be the most talented person in the world, but if they're jerks, I don't think it's worth it. And so when I do get somebody from recruiting saying, "Hey, we've got this excellent pre-construction professional that wants to meet you," great. Are they a jerk? No. Great. Next, what are their technical abilities? What are right? And so so I think that's important. One of the other things I think, when I remember I was talking to somebody, it was with regards to promotions, right? And so there was this list of, all right, is this person competent in these fundamental skills for their position, right? The technical abilities. And it's like, yes, 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 yes. And so, great. It sounds like they're a great fit. And I'm like, whoa, time out. What about from the cultural aspect? Like, is this person going to be able to manage people? Because I think we have this misconception that just because somebody's really good at their job, like, I'm a really good estimator, well, we'll put you in charge of other people so you can teach them to be good estimators or to be a good pre-con professional. And it doesn't necessarily work that way, right? It's one thing to be good at your job, to do something technical, but it's another to have to deal with people, because with people come emotions, with people come, baggage, with people, and these are things that you have to, as a leader, deal with, that you're not always being prepared to do. And so then you rely on your culture, right? You rely on some of those soft skills that aren't always necessarily quantifiable. And so when I say I'm a culture fanboy, I'm a big fan of having a strong culture, but there's also such things as having a toxic culture that can be strong, right? You can still have a strong culture, but it can be very toxic, but everybody knows what it is, right? And some people thrive in some of those types of environments. I don't, but there's people out there that do. And so I think it's important to just realize, like, what's a good culture fit for you. I had a professor at ASU that would always say that, for the whole time I was there, and you're a 20-something idiot kid, you don't know what that means, right? You're like, oh, I got to be a good culture fit, whatever. I just want to get paid, right? I don't want to pay to be here.
Show me the money.
Show me the money. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so another thing that he said that I remember always has stuck with me is, he said, you're going to be hired for your technical skills, and then you'll be promoted or demoted for, call it, your soft skills or your other skills. And that's held true, I think, in my career for sure. I've seen people where, man, they were super strong technically, and then over time they got to a point where they're like, man, you're not good at managing people. You're gonna hit that glass ceiling.
And I think, Rod, you've hit the nail on the head with that as well, because estimators technically and stereotyping is introverts with numbers. Got to be selfish with your time as well, because your time management's got to be good to get through all those bids, get the number out and right. They tend to not be very good at teaching other people how to do what they do very well, and the soft skills. But you look now in this current market where over 85% of projects are being delivered in a collaborative environment, the soft skills are becoming way more important. So we're at this kind of crossroads where we've got to change what we're recruiting for. And it's advice that I always give. And then the other big thing that I'm seeing is that middle management has got to be someone who can communicate to perfection what it's like to work within that company and what they're good at and what they're bad at. And that, again, is the soft skills. And do you think that's changing? Do you think that the skills that you would have looked for at the beginning of your career is different to what you look for now?
Yes and no. I think, the way I've kind of looked at pre-construction as a whole has changed, right? Where I still think that there's a place for the stereotypical estimator, right? With no soft skills, there's, not a lot of emotional intelligence. And then I also look at kind of what pre-construction means. And to me, it used to be all one and the same. for me before. And now I've come to find out where there's kind of this distinction between kind of estimators or one track, and another track is pre-construction professionals, call it, where the pre-construction professionals are ones that are able to be that conduit, that communication with all different parties involved, whether that's internally or externally. They're able to talk estimator, but they're also able to talk architecture. They're able to talk to an owner. What does the owner care about? And I think that as pre-con professionals, we are vital to the process to be able to get projects to be successful, and create opportunities for individuals to continue to excel in their career, right? I also look at attitudes of people, right? Yeah, they might not have all the technical skills that we're looking at, and we've had to make compromises, I think, as an industry on who we're hiring, right? Because before it was like, oh, they must have a degree from a construction management school, and they must, and it's kind of like now, like, well, maybe they have a community college degree, but their attitude's great, and they are willing to do what it takes to kind of do it. And it's like, all right, let's sign them up, right? Take a gamble, and a lot of those gambles end up turning out. So.
Diversity as well within teams is crucial. I mean, you talked earlier about the trades. I mean, we don't like taking from the trades because they're having a huge problem in getting people to work. But if someone wants to come out of the trade and they've got their hell bent on getting into pre-con or getting into a GC, I mean, they can add some serious value.
Agreed.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. I find that the most successful and high-performing pre-construction teams are basically completely diverse. And I think going forward, like you said, you'll have estimators, pre-construction folks, and then data engineers as a three-pronged approach.
Yeah, some companies are doing that already, right? They're very successful at it. Here at Big D, we're still kind of in the process, right? Being a national company, I think what's important is kind of standardizing how you're doing things, from a process standpoint all the way down to a cultural standpoint, right? If someone decides to transfer, from our office here in Arizona over to our Minneapolis office, like, a lot of things should be the same. Are there some nuances, differences? Yeah, sure. But in the end, like, it would, that's kind of the goal, I think, is to be able to have it taste the same for not only employees, but also owners, architects, right?
And that's where the technology, we talked about it off air there, that's where the technology is so important, that they can get up, they can go to another office, and the technology stack can be the same. Listen, this has been amazing, Rod. Really appreciate it. We only had an hour. We could talk for another 3 hours. It's coming up to that time. I want to thank you for your time. Also, if there's anybody listening, Rod, that thinks, you know what, Rod touched on a couple of things there that I would like to pick his brain on. Where's the best place to reach out and get in contact?
Yeah, so I would say, I don't know. I get LinkedIn. We could start a discussion on there, on your podcast, kind of LinkedIn, and I'd be more than happy to I'm fairly active on there, to just have a discussion, a constructive discussion about, any topics that folks are interested in.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's what I'll do. In the show notes below, I'll have your LinkedIn profile, and I'll create a link to that so they can click on there, send you a message, send you a connection, and collaborate, get together and find some solutions. Listen, this has been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it from everyone here at the Pre-Construction Podcast.
All right. Take care. Thank you.